It's time for My Jericho Question Time with John Mair.
Hello, afternoon, evening. It's a very cold afternoon, evening, or whatever time you're watching this. Welcome to the third My Jericho Question Time. I helped to invent the BBC version 42 years ago, in 1979, so I think I know the format after all this time. So this afternoon we're going to have a discussion with four prominent local people, and it's going to be a discussion. They're going to hopefully agree, disagree, shout at each other, whatever else people do in question time. Have an enjoyable debate, hopefully a civilised debate. First off, we've got Councillor Alex Hollingsworth, who is the Labour councillor for Carfax and Jericho, and a long-time Jericho resident. Kai Pischke, who is the Liberal Democrat candidate for the next local elections, I believe, who is a Somerville College student and a Liberal Democrat. Sarah Edwards from the Green Party, who is a near Jericho resident, I think, and the Vicar of St Barnabas, the Rev.Christopher Woods, who is definitely a Jericho resident. There's no Conservative. They searched far and wide, and they couldn't find a Conservative who would appear. We were going to have an empty blue chair, but never mind. And there's nobody from the Boatyard discussion either, because they're all invited, and neither the developer nor the Jericho Wharf Trust wanted to show up. Let's kick off, shall we? The first question is: are there too many Airbnbs in Jericho? Is it ruining Jericho? Who'd like to go first? Alex?
Yeah, very happy to kick off on this one. I think the first thing I would say is I'm going to use the phrase short-term lets because Airbnb is not the only letting organisation. And I've got personal experience of if you accidentally say Airbnb when you mean short-term lets, what happens is their lawyers phone up within the hour when I did that. So I'm going to say short-term lets. There are a range of companies out there. I think we've got a really serious problem in Jericho and actually across quite a lot of Oxford now. And it's an issue that's facing a lot of places which have got a thriving tourist economy, whether that's cities like ours, Brighton, Bath, and so on, Edinburgh, and then other cities across Europe, or places like Norfolk, like Cornwall, like Devon, where you've got a different sort of tourism industry, but a rural one. And what we're seeing is too many homes previously used mostly for rent to either families or to groups of sharing students or sharing young professionals, which are now only available as short-term lets. And we haven't had too many of the problems that places like London and New York and Barcelona have had with like party houses, places being taken over and occupied for commercial parties. But what worries me is the population loss. I can tell, as somebody who's lived here for a very long time, that you can go up certain streets in Jericho and there'll be an awful lot of lights off. And that's because those properties are on the short-term let market and they're only occupied at weekends. And if you look at the people we need for our local shops, our local services, our local school, and just the intangible things which make Jericho the great place to live in that it is, that if we start seeing too many of our houses going and essentially being turned into what are guest houses or hotels without the regulation, then we've got a really serious problem. And I think we're beginning to see that. Now, what can we do about it? And the answer is in England, as opposed to Scotland, where Edinburgh operates under law set by the Scottish government, it's not a lot. The city council, like other councils across the country, have been lobbying hard. And I can say that when it was just non-Conservative authorities, we weren't getting very far. Now that Conservative authorities like Cornwall are complaining as well, voices are beginning to be heard, but it's only beginning. What I think we should have is local councils able to set maximum thresholds for the number of short-term lets, just like we do with HMOs. There should be clear regulation for short-term landlords, just in the same way as there are for HMOs. There should be the same food, health and safety inspections that guest houses and hotels have to show if a short-term let is essentially being used as a guest house. And finally, if you are running a business, then I think it's only fair that that business pays things like the commercial rate for waste collection, rather than piggybacking off the council taxpayer funded domestic waste collection. So those are all things which the council has been asking for a number of years. We've made a little bit of progress with government, but there is still a hell of a long way to go.
Father Chris, you're a governor of a local school. Are you noticing the effect of short-term lets at the school?
Yes, I think there is an impact of short-term lets on the community, and I agree with everything that Alex has said. The problem with, I suppose, the attendance at school is that there aren't the same number of families in Jericho. There aren't the same number of families moving into Jericho, and therefore the cohort of children has largely reduced. We are trying very hard as governors to recruit and to encourage new families to come into the school and to try us out. There is an open day coming up.
On Saturday week? Saturday week? When is it?
Saturday week, yes.
Saturday week,
1st of December. 1st of December. So yes, I think I agree with everything that Alex has said. I for fear of being hypocritical, I have used short-term lets myself and continue to do so on holiday. So I suppose it's a salutary warning to be a bit more mindful of the fact that they're just there and they're fine. They actually do impact quite significantly on the local community.
Sarah, what's your view?
Yes, I think I'd echo a lot of what Alex has said. Clearly, one of the main issues is that the loss of permanent housing. So, the opportunity for people to come and have their lovely visit is at the expense of a property that could be occupied by a permanent resident. So, I think it's that loss of opportunity for homes, which is a deep concern. But all the other points that Alex made, the lack of regulation, health and safety issues, etc., the things that you'd expect in a context like that, because it's like a loophole, really, isn't it? They're slipping through the net and able to operate on a different basis. I think one of the things that we've, as Greens, have considered is the idea of if they're going ahead having a form of bedroom tax, and that way, that there is at least some income coming back that can be put into other forms of housing and into services. But certainly, the loss of permanent housing, but also, the sense of community. I totally agree with what Alex was saying and Father Chris. If you lose the permanent residents, it can feel like a bit of a ghost town.
Should we be proud of our community that people want to come, if only for 2 days?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a matter of balance, isn't it? I mean, if people want to visit a city, they need to go somewhere. But I think it's a matter of having more control over how many and where tourist accommodation is provided.
Alex, how many Airbnbs are there in Jericho? Any idea of the number?
I won't refer to a particular company, but you can look on that company's website. It varies, and I think a lot of people use Airbnb and similar sites to advertise a single room or a house for a couple of weeks, and that's fine. It's the ones which are the whole house, the whole of the time that I've got the big concern about. When we've looked at numbers across Oxford, it's over 1,000, and those are concentrated in places near the city centre, so Jericho, Osney, Grand Pont, St Clements, and so on, the places you would expect. So that's a really significant number. And just as an example of quite how bad it can get, I grew up in a village in North Norfolk. I was back there for a family funeral a few weeks ago, and talking to somebody from the funeral directors. One of those villages, about 3 villages away from where I grew up, 85% of the homes are now holiday let, second home, or short-term let. And unsurprisingly, the school, like the school in every one of those villages, has long gone. Now, we're not near that yet, but that's a really salutary warning of what can happen if you're not careful.
Put a number on the number of short-term lets in Jericho. Of the 1,000, how many of those are Jericho, would you think?
There's, I mean, I would say there's 50 to 100 any one time. It does vary, but it's quite significant, and there are blocks where there are a lot, all in rapid succession.
Kai, do you have a view on this, on short-term letting in Jericho?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that broadly we all agree on this, that part of the thing that makes Jericho such a nice community is the community feel. And the danger here is really that, you know, if there's houses that are being used for Airbnbs or short-term lets, that's taking away a place that could be used by someone who could be a lot more involved in the community and who could benefit from what Jericho has to offer. You know, really is not going to happen if it's being used by people who are just staying there for a few days. And I think that it kind of highlights the fact that we do have a problem in terms of there not being enough houses for people in Oxford generally. And yeah, as well, you mentioned kind of students and HMOs and things like that. I think that students find it very difficult to find places in Jericho. And I think that, yeah, at the moment, what would be good would maybe be to find out more about the scope of the problem. So you mentioned that we don't know exactly kind of how big a problem this is, how many of the places on Airbnb are just being let out for a weekend or for, you know, a short period of time, and how many of these places are actually being used just full time as a short-term let place. And that's kind of the primary purpose. So I think that it's definitely something that we should look into more and find out kind of what the scope of the problem is. And then that's going to lead us to be in a better position to find out how we can deal with it.
You say that, Kai, but I mean, on my daily litter pick, I see at the moment probably about 15 to let signs and quite often student to let signs. So how difficult is it for students to rent in Jericho?
I think it's quite difficult in general. I think there are a lot of students who, you know, obviously students are trying to navigate the whole housing market at the same time as doing the degree and being in Oxford for a kind of short amount of time. And at the moment, like caps on numbers of HMOs and things like that can make it difficult for students to find a suitable place. So I do think that it would be nice if in Jericho there were more places available, not just for students, but for anyone who's kind of looking to move to Jericho and looking to become part of that community and to actually kind of, you know, reap the benefits of what is a really nice area of Oxford. So I think that, yeah, for anyone who's in that position and who's struggling to find somewhere where they can live affordably, it's really not helping the situation that there are places being used like this.
Moving on, if we can, to question 2. How do we get a clean and a green Jericho? Sarah, that's a natural for you. How do we get a Jericho to be clean and green?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? It depends what you mean by green. I think firstly to say congratulations to everyone who's been doing the work on Mount Place and the transformation. It really, I was looking at it today, and it's absolutely lovely. The planting there, and you know, creating just an attractive place for people to visit and enjoy. And of course, the litter picking is important. In terms of the broader green issues, I mean, we've really got to work hard, incredibly hard and fast, on dealing with the climate issue, and that means greening our homes And there are big challenges in an area like Jericho, not just because we've got older properties, but also we've got the conservation area, which is important in terms of the aesthetic, but it does bring extra challenges. And at the moment, some of the things that people want to do to their homes, they can't. The classic example is solar panels on the street facing facades of homes. So I think we do need to work really hard on those wider issues in terms of greening. We're coming on later to talk about the picture in the 2030s. So some of the things I might mention might come in at that point. But so I think air quality is another key thing for enjoying the cleaner environment, and that of course links directly to the traffic and the big debates we've had about how to reduce motorised traffic in Jericho. And as you know, I was a very strong supporter of trying to find the low traffic neighbourhood solution. So
the low traffic horse is bolted. The road is open.
The road is
now?
open, but yeah, the road is open, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue. There's measures, obviously, that can still be taken locally, but also the bigger picture for Oxford. Bringing on the restrictions that will overall reduce through traffic and enable people to, encourage and enable people to complete their activities and their journeys without so many people having to get into a car. I think, so we mustn't lose sight of air pollution and air quality and noise. That's another part of greening Jericho. We want a quieter, especially for people who are obviously living actually right on the main road. So those are just some initial suggestions.
Father Chris, clean and green Jericho, how are we going to get it?
I think we all continue to help with the litter picks. We keep encouraging people to recycle, to use less plastic. I would very much like to put some solar panels on St Barnabas Church roof. It won't be an easy thing to do, but I would quite like to do it. I think it would be a very important gesture, a very, very important statement, as well as a beneficial.
Would you be allowed to? Would you be allowed to?
Yes, I mean, churches do have solar panels. Because it's Grade 1 listed, I don't perceive it would be an easy process, but the Church of England is very, very keen on making everything as green and sustainable as possible. So I'm sure it is possible. So that's a task for the future. Church buildings are not efficient with heat. That's the problem. They're not energy efficient. Neither is my home. It's not energy efficient either. Victorian houses tend not to be. And that's a big frustration. And so I feel very much that there's a lot of work to do for that to change. And that's addressing the climate change issue. But we can do smaller things. We can recycle. And largely, I think Jericho is a good recycling community, although I did see somebody who'd put polystyrene in a recycling bin the other day, and I thought, quite rightly, the council didn't take it. So, it's...
Now, you've been here for 2 years now. Have you spotted any differences in terms of cleaning and greening in Jericho? What about Mount Place? What's your view on that?
Yes, I think it's been transformed. It's a much happier, much more attractive, much more welcoming little square. It's lovely, and what's even lovelier is the events that are happening there. The markets, the the various.
Would you like to
musical-
advertise your event on the 5th of December?
Yes, Jericho Christmas Market, 5th of December from 12 noon. Lots of stalls, music, carols. A great occasion coming up.
Very good. Kai, do you have a view on greening Jericho?
Yeah, so I think that it kind of comes in two parts almost. Like in one way, kind of greening Jericho, increasing the amount of like green spaces and things available is just nice, in that it makes it a nicer place to live, a nicer place to walk around. But then, like Sarah was mentioning as well, the kind of issue of air pollution, the issue of traffic is really something that needs to be addressed. And I was quite sad about the outcome of the whole Walton Street LTN situation. And I think that definitely the one thing that there was that, you know, obviously everyone had different opinions on that, but I think that there was a consensus that something should be done. And the fact that there wasn't any effort put into coming up with a solution that would actually work for everyone is really a big failure, and is something that we need to address, because at the moment the situation with traffic and the situation with cars is not ideal. And I think that really that is kind of one of the big things that needs to happen, is that we need to look back into that and see if we can come up with some solution that's going to work for everyone, and that's going to ensure that there are kind of less cars doing rat runs around Jericho, and that we reduce the amount of traffic.
Whose failure was it, Kai? Was there too much utopianism about?
I don't think so. I think that in general, what was really nice was seeing the whole community engage with this. Like, I mean, obviously it was an issue that people had maybe differing opinions on, very like strongly differing opinions on. But the fact that people actually had opinions on that, and the fact that people kind of were interested in the future of the community, is really a positive thing. And it's something that I think if there was a better consultation, if there was more thought put into how we implement it, then it could have turned out to be something really good. I think that in part it was the fact that we had a Tory county council at the time, and I think that they weren't quite ambitious enough in terms of taking it forward, because it was a difficult situation. And I'm hoping that now with the new county council, we'll be in a much better position maybe to revisit that and find something that will work for everyone.
Okay, but we blew it, didn't we? We blew the chance to create some form of an LTN in Jericho.
I hope not. I hope that it's something that will be put back on the table at some point. I think at the moment we definitely have come to a setback where it's going to be a lot harder. It's probably going to take a lot longer. But I mean, there is definitely still a momentum there for something to be done. So I don't necessarily think we've blown it, no.
Alex, you're in power in the city and in the county, Sharon. Have we blown it? How do we create a clean and green Jericho?
The question's kind of broadened into quite a number of areas, so I'll try and pick them up. I think to sort of addressing Kai's point about the LTN, of course, I mean, as somebody who heard firsthand and very frankly from hundreds of people with totally diametric opposed views, I think the notion that a bit more consultation would have come up with something that everybody would have been happy with, I think is probably a little bit rose tinted. I think there could have been something that was that more people were happier with, but when one group want to be able to drive everywhere and another group wishes to prevent that, at some point you're going to upset somebody, and I think it's always sensible to just be aware of that. The primary issue that we faced, the primary problem with traffic in Jericho was the rat run. I mean, it was one thing, but it was a very big thing, which was the big rat run through Little Clarendon Street and down Walton Street. There are ways of preventing that from happening, which I hope that the County Council will go back and explore. My personal preference, as it has been for 25, 30 years, and I appreciate there are some challenges around the access to parking spaces on Little Clarendon Street, is to stop Little Clarendon Street being for motorised vehicles. No rat run. If there's no Little Clarendon Street you can drive down. Now, that would need some work and it would need some effort, but it would have fixed the problem that needed fixing without creating any of the other problems that were created when Moulton Street was shut. So I think things like that. Now, I know that different community groups are talking to each other. They're trying to find common ground. Based on what I've seen so far, they're still very early stages at the finding common ground, but at least they're having civilized conversations, which they previously weren't. So that can only be a good thing. And I think it's probably now incumbent on both councils to listen and to wait for those groups to develop that work and come forward with something. And if they don't, then the two councils may have to come up with something of their own, in the full knowledge that whatever it is will have issues and will upset somebody, and probably quite a lot of somebody's, and upset them quite a lot. So let's see how that pulls forward. On the issue of greening, in the sense of addressing the climate crisis, which Sarah rightly raised and interpreted your question as being about, I think she's absolutely right to say in a place like Jericho, you've got the fact that we have a conservation area and it is a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. And I should say to Father Christopher, having a Grade 1 listed building may be a much bigger challenge than he thinks. But I'm sure the Church of England has appropriate architects and lawyers and can come up with something. But the issue in a conservation area, there's not a ban on solar panels. What the approach is always is you balance the harm to the conservation area against the benefit of whatever is proposed. So that's the first principle. So there's a steeper test, and that's not a local principle. That's established in national law. And then there is what I think is probably a more important principle, which is when you're addressing carbon efficiency in a building, is you've got to look at the fabric first. So rather than working out a way of generating energy in a different way, you should be working out a way of using less energy. And like Father Christopher, I live in a Victorian house with all the challenges around insulation and rickety brickwork and windows that rattle and all the rest of it. So what I need to do, as most people in Jericho need to do, is to reduce the amount of energy we use. So putting solar panels on may be part of the answer, but it should never be the first thing you do. The first thing you should do should always be about reducing the energy you use, rather than just using the same amount of energy but generating it differently. And that, I think, is a really important principle, which certainly the City Council and all the parties represented on it are fully signed up to, this notion of fabric first and then generation second. So it's kind of like the hierarchy of recycling. Which takes me, I hope, onto the clean element of it, of the question. I think the two things which have really worked are the community litter picks. I know, John, you yourself are an absolute stalwart of that, and have done wonders in challenging bad behaviour and in encouraging good behaviour.
Have I done enough, Alex? Have I done? I mean, there are still two grot spots, which the council seems to be able to do nothing about.
I think it's always an ongoing process with something like this. I don't think you ever, finish and then go, that's fixed. People change. We have a very mobile population in Jericho, and that was the second point I was going to come on to. We have a lot of people who come to Jericho for the first time each year, either as students or as professionals or as visitors or whatever it might be. And I think one of the real challenges that we, the local community, have is making sure there's that process of education, really basic stuff. What day are the bin days? What goes in which bag? The slightly idiosyncratic thing that Oxford has of the recycling going in a blue thing, not a green thing, which is different to a lot of people, a lot of places. So I think there's an education thing. And I know in the past, Oxford Student Union did a really strong job on helping with student households and helping on those kind of basic educational processes. But in the end, what has worked, and I think what continues to work for all of these things, is community initiatives. it is always better for communities to do things for themselves rather than wait for some other to do them for them. So the community litter picking, the greening Jericho, which won an Oxford Preservation Trust award for their work across the area. The groups doing the planting on Walton Street, the creation of small community gardens, all of those things which establish ownership by the community and for the community, those are the things that make the difference. And I think that's why I would say we are winning, but we haven't won. And being realistic, we will never win in the sense that it'll all fix itself. It will always be an ongoing effort. But going back to that point about the short-term lets, it's things like that. It's doing things as a community rather than as individuals that I think strengthen the community and make it a good place. And so the more of that, the better.
Now let's talk about Mount Place. How much have you, as a council, spent on Mount Place, and has it been money well spent?
Are you asking me that question?
Yeah, I am, Alex. Yes, you're the councillor.
It's a sum of money which doesn't immediately come to mind. Tens of thousands, I think, would be the figure that I would, but I'd need to check. But that was for the Yorkstone paving work and a bit of clearance. Most of the gardening, of course, has been done by the local community. I think it's transformed. I think it's massively transformed, and I think it's indicative of how best to go about these things. Identify a vision, do an intervention from your local council. So in this instance, some repaving and some of the clearing, and create a fresh start from which community initiative can build and take over. And I think what we now have is not just somewhere that's much more physically attractive, but is something that is a hub of a community which doesn't have many public open spaces because of we were built as a tightly packed Victorian suburb where public open spaces didn't happen. So it's great to see a space that all members of the community, young, old, across the full spectrum of Jericho's residents, from the working class through to the sort of middle classes, which make up a lot of the population and whatever. There is a proper cross section of people who meet and talk and chat and interact with one another, and that is a good thing. If we make places unfriendly to groups of our own residents, then they fail. And I think Mount Place is succeeding because it welcomes everyone.
You spent £1,500 of public money, or was on the Bulls Court. Was that money well spent? I've only ever seen 7 people use it in 6 months.
I've seen plenty more people than that use it, and I've seen it used very regularly. I think anything that encourages activity is absolutely fine, and yeah, I think it's been a great success.
Okay, we're going to move on to the boatyard, which is coming up for planning probably on the 9th of December. The new plans for the boatyard. Alex, can you explain why you have to recluse yourself from this discussion?
I do. I have to recuse myself, as I have done ever since any discussion of the boatyard has taken place in my role as a councillor. I live very close to the boatyard, and my house is next door to the community centre building, which is intrinsically linked to the planning applications. I know this particular planning application excludes it, but that means I have a clear financial conflict of interest, and I therefore take no part in any discussion, private or public, around the boatyard. And I will, I'll mute, and then I think the director will switch off my camera for the duration.
Yes, we're going to disappear you. So if Alex can disappear. All right, the new plans for the boatyard, they're out there. You will have seen some of them. They're out there on the council planning site. It's been a saga that's been going on for 17 years, or maybe it's 18 by now. Father Chris, you're most directly affected. What's your feeling on A, the plans, and B, the reaction to them?
So from the church's point of view, if I could start with that, I think the biggest shock for us was the removal of 33A Canal Street, which is the community centre, St Barnabas Institute building, from the scheme, which therefore completely removes affordable housing from the scheme, and that is a big blow to us from the church's point of view. And we have an ethical question there that we have to address in our response when we come to formulate it in the next few days. From a community point of view, I think there is much to commend the scheme to the people in terms of new community facilities, a square, a cafe, and a boatyard. There are lots that are not perfect about the scheme. There's quite a lot that's not good about the scheme. But the issue, I think, here is that there are so many stakeholders, and it's very hard to get everybody's view incorporated. So I think the reaction is it's not a great scheme at present, but I don't think that I'm giving up hope that something will happen. Yes, this saga has been going on for so long, and people are fatigued by it. But I've only been here 2.5 years, and so it's still, in my view, it's an exciting venture. There is possibility ahead. It's whatever the council planning committee decide on in the first week of December. There is a future for it. So we just have to make sure it's the best scheme that we can get.
You're the closest we have to an expert on this panel on the boatyard. Let's go through it one by one. The houses, too many of them, too posh, too close to you?
Too close, certainly. Probably too many, but I understand why that's the case. Probably too high, I think. But yes, too close to St Barnabas Street.
Moving round to the piazza, which outside of your church, too small. Does Jericho need a piazza?
I think a piazza is a very good thing. It's currently too small, I think, in the plan.
And the boatyard? Do we need a boatyard? They've got by for 20 years without a boatyard. Who says we need a boatyard?
I think there is a strong argument for a boatyard from a commercial point of view, from a canal boating point of view. But there are those equally who say that it's not necessary. I think I personally don't have a problem with the boatyard. I think the problem I have with it is it's too big. Again, too big. But there are many arguments that would.
They're going to make a lot of noise, which is going to drift into your church.
Yes, and that is a big concern for us, is the noise level. That hasn't really featured much in many of the discussions that I've been involved in. But I imagine it's going to be pretty noisy.
You'll be next to a factory environment in essence, won't you?
Well, remains to be seen.
Okay, let's move around to the community centre, or proposed community centre. Too big, too large, going to be used? What's your feeling on that?
I think when it was conceived, it was ambitious, and it looks to be very, very high quality spec. So if it's managed well, if it's run well, if it's advertised well, then it could be brilliant. It could be absolutely brilliant, because the current centre is not fit for purpose anymore. It was built in the Victorian period, and it's not disabled compliant. So, the new building would be absolutely perfect in that sense. I think the danger of ambition when building or planning to build a new facility like that is that you imagine something in your head. You imagine a community using the extent of the facilities, but actually, in reality, it's possibly not going to be like that. I think one ought to perhaps think again about the size of it, perhaps. But having said that, I mean it's a very high spec plan.
Let me ask you a couple questions of philosophy. What do we
Yes.
understand by community, and is this whole scheme just a dream, just a fantasy?
I think community is a very difficult concept to fully define. I think, given the discussions that we've had at the start of this panel regarding short-term lets, I think there are many communities within a community. So, and community is very transient. So you've got long-term residents, but you've got short-term residents too. And Jericho is a very, very transient community, if you like. So the needs that you conceive of for something, for a facility 5 years ago, largely changes again. And again, facilities might need to be different in another 5 or 10 years' time. So it is very, very difficult to represent adequately the needs of a community in this day and age, because there is no such thing as a permanent community anymore. It's a transient community. It's a community of communities. And you can never meet the entirety of those needs. What you do is you provide space where different cross-sections of community can meet together in a safe and open way. That's what is required. That's why somewhere like a church is perfect, because it can facilitate a variety of different people coming together. And that's why a community centre is also a very good asset to a community, because it can provide a safe, neutral space for a variety of different communities to come together. But you need to conceive of it in that way, and you need to provide that kind of facility from the get-go. Your other question, John?
My fantasy point. You've been pitchforked into this battle, which is rather like the First World War. You know, how do you view it? Do you view it as a fantasy or realist? What's going to happen?
I don't view it as a fantasy. I mean, I think I'm very happy to live in a dream, in an imagination, but obviously also have to be brought down to reality quite often. But that's my whole world as a vicar, is both dream and reality. I'm happy to dream dreams, and I'm happy to live in the hope that if you work hard enough, something can happen. But I do think sometimes that you can live so much in another reality that you lose sight of the real world, and that's the challenge. You need to continually listen to the reality of what's going on around you, in order to sort of tweak your dreams, if you like. That doesn't contradict myself. I don't think. I think I'm not giving up hope on this. I think there is still a possibility that we will get a Jericho Wharf. It may not be exactly as we see it in the plans at the moment, but I'm sure we will have something. When that happens, I don't know.
Let's take you out of the spotlight. Sarah, what's your view on the new boatyard plans?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that this has been obviously a hugely difficult jigsaw, with all these different elements, which are very important but have had to be balanced against each other, with obviously different interests from different parties. And I'd just like to give credit to the Jericho Wharf Trust, who I think have worked incredibly hard over a long time, trying to bring people together, trying to, sorry to mix my metaphors, but square circles and make something that would work. I think from my point of view, there are things about it which I think are not satisfactory in terms of the current proposal. I think the piazza clearly is small. The high building on the south side of the piazza means that it will be quite a shaded space. And one of the key things about this proposal is that, or about the opportunity, is to provide some rare open space in Jericho, which doesn't have much at the moment, as we said earlier. But I think one of the real concerns is the one that Father Christopher mentioned, which is this is just a huge issue, that the affordable housing that was central to the original proposals, the affordable housing is going from the current what was currently on the table, and I mean that's obviously, you know, completely unacceptable. The One of the reasons or one of the concerns about the way we've arrived at this is that the developers at the moment, having put forward their proposals, they're saying that they can't afford to do some of the things they're supposed to be doing because the value of the homes that they're building is lower than they envisaged. And the value they're putting on them is based on a flawed report commissioned by the City Council, which compares the value of these homes, these new homes, to properties in Wolvercott and Barton. And this is it's not easy. I appreciate it's not easy identifying properties to compare with, but the idea that Jericho's house prices are can be directly compared to Wolvercott and Barton, I think is basically doesn't make a lot of sense. So there is that underlying flaw, as far as I'm concerned, in the calculations that are being put forward by the developers, and they're using that to excuse themselves effectively from some of the things that they would otherwise have been committed to.
Just to be fair to them, Sarah, that they're putting 655,000 into a bridge fund rather than the social housing.
I understand that, but their overall calculations are based on undervaluing what they will get back from the market housing, and that basically that can't be an acceptable way of looking at the figures.
Jericho prices are dropping, by the way, house prices. But okay. So what's the way forward? There is no way forward, isn't it? Just why don't we just convert it to a mud flat?
I think it's important to keep going and try and iron things out. And say all credit to the Jericho Wharf Trust for hanging in there and trying to. I know they're beavering away trying to decide what their response is to the latest proposals. But it's been a long time in the coming, and Greens were there at the beginning fighting for the boatyard not to be scrapped, and I think it's taken a long time, but we to get sort of over the final hurdles and have an acceptable scheme that delivers well for the community. I think
Let me ask you a question I asked Father Christopher. Surely it's just a fantasy. What the JWT wants is just a fantasy, which is uneconomic, will never happen.
I think, as I say, I think it's worth continuing to negotiate and to try and identify what can be achieved. Not obviously with schemes like this, I say it's a big jigsaw. Some bits may not fit, some bits may have to be adjusted. There's been an awful lot of that up to now. It may be there's say another round to be done, but it's been really hard, I know, and the Environment Agency have thrown their oar in at various stages. So it's not been straightforward, but I think the various elements are each important: the community facilities, the boatyard, the public space, and yes, the affordable housing, which needs to be.
Well, last question: would you blame the developer if he walked away? They walked away.
Obviously, the developer will be having to decide what's commercially in their interests, what's in their interest in the longer term of their business. I mean, that's for them to decide. The fact that it's taken so long, so very, very long to sort this site out, I'm not the only person who's wondered some while ago if there ought to have been a compulsory purchase to finalise the scheme. But we're here at the moment. There's a proposal on the table. I'm not making any party comments. I'm giving you my personal views, and I hope, as I say, that that something can be rescued that really works for the community.
Kai, what's the Liberal Democrat view on the boatyard?
So I think a lot of the key points have been mentioned. I think that it's a scheme that has a lot of potential. This is something that could be great for Jericho. And as a kind of space near the canal, I think it's really good that actually we're being ambitious and trying to do something that's quite hard and maybe quite difficult to get right, but could have huge benefits for the communities. But I think the key things that people have already pointed out that are problematic are the lack of social housing, the lack of affordable housing is just really unacceptable. I think as the scheme stands at the moment, building a whole row of very posh homes and having like absolutely zero consideration for affordable housing is not really a good element of the scheme. I also think the situation with the bridge is not ideal. So I think, it depends on what the situation is with the lease on the Mount Place Bridge, but going all the way up and around and then walking all the way back and then trying to get to the station or something is not really ideal. And I think that obviously there are safety concerns with the bridge, but I think that it's definitely something that would be helpful to know kind of how that plays out when evaluating the scheme, because that could be something that's also very beneficial for people trying to get to the other side of the canal, particularly since that's something that promotes active travel. It promotes kind of pedestrian, cyclists, people trying to get around without cars as well. And also I think, yeah.
Go on, finish off.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to mention also, I think the piazza at the moment is a bit too small, and I think that could be difficult if it's going to become a community space, because it would be nice to be able to use that for community events. And if it's just kind of being squeezed in with not really enough space to be able to host kind of larger events and to be able to accommodate larger groups of people, then that would be really a shame as well, because it would definitely be kind of a missed opportunity for a nice central hub of Jericho where things could happen. So yeah.
We have that in Mount Place. So a very quick fire question to the three of you. Is it going to be built in the next 5 years? Yes or no? Father Chris. Will it be built in the next 5 years? Can you hear me? No? Kai, could you perhaps you pick up whilst Father Chris. Is it going to be built in the next 5 years? Yes or no?
I certainly hope so. I'm optimistic. I think that it could potentially be built in the next 5 years, but whether or not that happens depends on how things pan out from here. So I'm hoping that it will happen, but I think that obviously it's been a lot longer than 5 years that has been going on, and so far we haven't made much progress. So yeah, hoping that things will get better from here.
Sarah, will it be built in the next 5 years?
Well, obviously, let's hope so. I have to say, another site in Jericho that concerns me that's taken so long is the health centre site, the old health centre. I mean, it's just such a waste that's been sitting empty.
No, it's been knocked down now. Come along,
like
it's been knocked.
Yeah, it's been. Yeah, I know it's been worked on now, but it's been about 8 years. So that space could have been used for something for about 8 years.
Be used for housing. Father Chris, if you can hear us now, will it be
Yes,
built
I'm
in the
back.
next
Sorry,
5
I had
years?
a temporary outage. No, it won't be built in 5 years, maybe 10. By 2030, let's hope it's built, but not 5 years.
Okay, a wonderful segue. Can we have Alex Hollingsworth back? Use your imaginations at the end. What's Jericho going to be like in 2030? Alex, are you back with us here and seeing? Good. Right. What's Jericho going to be like in 2030, Alex?
Um, I think it will be quite similar to how it is now, but only if we collectively work at some of the real challenges that we're facing. So one of the great things about Jericho is it's a very mixed community. We've got a lot of council housing. We've got private tenants who are here for long periods and short periods. We've got a range of ages. That's why the first item that we talked about, the rise of short-term lets, is such a risk because it undermines the community. Now, my kids have left school, both at university now, but when they were at St Barnabas School, there were a lot of children from what was then the newly built social housing in William Lucy Way. And I think what that says is if we're going to have thriving institutions and a thriving community and a proper mixture, which is what makes Jericho great, then we're going to need more of that kind of social housing. We're going to need greater mixtures. So I hope and I think it will still be a great place to live if it becomes a place different, radically different to what it is now, then I think we will have failed. So I think with all of these things, we need collectively as a community to be making every effort to preserve and to enhance what makes Jericho great. And I think what makes it great is its mixture of different things, its smooth edges, and in particular, its rough edges.
Kai, what's Jericho going to be like in 2030 when you're a Liberal Democrat councillor here?
Yes,
And you're
so
second.
I'm very optimistic for Jericho. I think that one of the amazing things about Jericho is the fact that everyone loves this community and really wants to make it the best that it can be. And I think that that's such a great asset to have because it means that come 2030, hopefully all these really, cool, optimistic ideas will actually come into practice. And hopefully a lot of the things that people have been working for, maybe a bus service, for example, would be amazing, will be in place by 2030, and we can really make the most of what is such a nice, lovely community. So yes, I think that there's a bright future ahead for Jericho.
3 bus services have been tried and 3 have failed. Sarah, what would Jericho be like in 2030?
Picking up on that, yes, the answer is that people need to be able to access what they want to do and what they need to do, whatever form of transport that takes. And so, yes, whether it's a bus, a minibus, if people can't use, or a free taxi, if people can't use active travel, if they can't jump on a bike, if they can't walk, they need assistance in some shape or form. I echo really what Alex was saying about the diversity in the community, and I think one of the great things is the age range, the diverse demographic, and people from different backgrounds and cultures, and so that obviously needs to be nurtured and encouraged. And thinking of people starting out in life and the school, I mean, the vision should be everybody can walk to school. A handful of people might come in by bus, but the idea of loads of people turning up in a car, we hope that'll be a thing of the past. So the very localized facilities, localized services, I think are a sort of key part of the vision for the future, because that has, the more localized we are, the less impact we have, negative impact we have, and the more we can achieve what we want close to home. There's obviously lots of things that will be part of a wonderful Jericho in 2030. But I'm optimistic, but we've got to really work hard at it. And there are huge challenges ahead, as we said earlier about greening up our homes, for example. And I'd just like to pick up on one point that Alex made, because he was saying fabric first. But my understanding is that today, even if you put forward a home that was absolutely oozing insulation and that was snug as a bug in terms of all the things that could be done insulation wise, there would still be a problem asking to put solar panels on the street.
Right, Father Chris, use your imagination, which you do every week, every day.
Yes, the church will be full every day. There'll be lots of wonderful music as it currently is. The school will be bursting at the seams. The boatyard will be full of wonderful people every day. Boats will be coming in to get fixed. The community centre will be thriving. The current community centre, 33A Canal Street, would be social housing. There won't be any cars. There'll be lots of e-scooters. I don't like e-scooters, by the way, but there we are. There will be a massive new building behind the Jericho Health Centre, the new Jericho Health Centre. I can't remember what kind of a building it's going to be. It's going to be built by the university, I think, isn't it?
The humanities. It was in the Oxford Mail in the last week or so.
Humanities, yes, that's going to be built. What is the old health centre going to be? I don't know what it's going to be.
That's going to be shops and houses. Alex will probably tell us more on that. Alex, very quickly, what's going where the old health centre was?
It's mostly flats, and it wasn't empty for 8 years. There were people living in it until a couple of months ago. It's mostly flats. So there'll be the existing block refurbished, new block behind, and on the ground floor, what will be. It was intended to be shops, but because the government's changed the planning use classes, sorry, that's the dullest thing to finish on. There will be much more flexibility about what can go there. So it could be a cafe, could be a shop, that kind of thing.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. It's been an interesting hour. We haven't quite finished yet because Christmas is coming up, but My Jericho continues on December the 9th, which is when the council hopefully will meet to decide on the current application of the boatyard. There'll be a live My Jericho at 5:50, live from the town hall, unadulterated. You can just sit and watch it. We'll stream it live. On the 5th of December, as Father Christopher mentioned, there's going to be a fair in Mount Place, music, food, German sausages, all afternoon long. Please come to that. And on the 6th of December, wine and cheese in the wine, is it called the wine store, the wine vault in Little Clarendon Street. Do come along. You can go onto My Jericho and register for that. And finally, these things all cost money. So if you look down the back of your sofa and can find any money, do contribute to Lloyds Bank 309626 and the account 48518460. The account name is Jericho Good Works. It all goes towards the good works. Any live events, the money goes towards the church clock. And I think we've probably put about getting on for £300-400 into that as well already. And I think any profit from December the 5th will go towards the church clock. So time will not stand still in Jericho for much longer. So, and if you want to watch any past My Jericho edition, just go onto YouTube or go to myjericho.co.uk. But see you all on the 9th of December. And thank you, everybody here. Goodbye.